So some background for the book, right? So Solinsky was a community organizer in Chicago in the 60s. He was kind of one of the first people to think about like radical ways to reinvent politics by grassroots movements, by community organizing, by people rising up and putting pressure on politicians through community movements as opposed to through merely elections, right? Like if you want to have politicians change their tune and stuff, you got to kind of put force on them in some way or other, right? Either force through politics, forced through threatening to not have them reelected, or forced through like marching outside their house with like signs and burning pitchforks, right? And so this is kind of his, I guess, a manifesto in a sort of way, but also like just a kind of a rule book or a guidebook for how to change things in politics in a country. It's a very interesting book that's not often taught, but like if you look again, the same way I think is like the Solzhenitsyn article or speech we just read gave pretty good roadmap to like what's going on in the country like today in some ways, right? Especially with the media, especially with the way that like intellectuals are treated in America and like the intellectual homogeneity, like the fact that like people in universities don't think like different thoughts, like there's not new original thought coming out of university to like help like actually fix problems in the world, right? Solinsky kind of does that from like the community organizing side, I think, and so just to kind of give a context and a notion of like what's out there as far as ideologies and thoughts that are going around the world, going around our country that reflect public policy. It's an important text to read, right? And it's not necessarily no spoiler alerts. I'll just like we'll get through it and then we'll talk about it as we go. So it can be a troubling text, and there's a lot of like pretty radical stuff in here. Obviously, it's called Rules for Radicals, right? But like I'm not advocating anybody do necessarily the things that are in this book, right? But there's like this tactic book that is out there and is important to know, right? No matter what side you're on with any issue, right? Just that this is a way to go about pursuing political change that shouldn't be forgotten or discounted, right? If you want to be aware of what's really going on in the country and the world. All right. So somebody want to read the first paragraph here? I'll read the first one, then somebody can pick up from there, okay? The revolutionary force today has two targets, moral as well as material. Its young protagonists are one moment reminiscent of the idealistic early Christians, yet they also urge violence and cry, burn the system down. They have no illusions about the system, but plenty of illusions about the way to change our world. It is to this point that I've written the book. These words are written in desperation, partly because it is what they do and will do that will give meaning to what I and the radicals of my generation have done with our lives. They are now the vanguard, and they have had to start almost from scratch. Few have survived the Joe McCarthy Holocaust of the early 1950s, and those that were, even fewer, whose misunderstanding and insights had developed beyond the dialectical materialism of orthodox Marxism. My fellow radicals, who are supposed to pass the torch of experience and insights to a new generation, just were not there. As the young looked at the society around them, it was, in their words, materialistic, decadent, bourgeoisie in its values, bankrupt and violent. Is it any wonder that they were rejected, that they rejected us in total, right? Today's generation is desperately trying to make some sense out of their lives and out of the world. Most of them are the products of the middle class. They have rejected their materialistic backgrounds, the goal of a well-paying job, suburban home, automobile, country club membership, first-class travel, status, security, and everything that meant success to their parents. They have had it. They watched it lead to their parents' tranquilizers, alcohol, long-term endurance marriages or divorces, high blood pressure, ulcers, frustration, and then disillusionment of the good life. They have seen the almost unbelievable idiocy of our political leadership. In the past, political leaders, ranging from the mayors to governors to the White House, were regarded with respect and almost every reverence. Today, they are viewed with contempt. This negativism now extends to all institutions, from police to the courts to the system itself. We are living in a world of mass media which daily exposes society's innate hypocrisy, its contradictions, and the apparent failure of almost every facet of our social and political life. The young have seen their activist participatory democracy turn into its antithesis, nihilistic bombing and murder. The political panaceas of the past, panacea is like something that cures all ill. Like if you have like a panacea for a disease, it's like a vaccine, but a vaccine that works for 100% of the time. That's where panacea. So you don't have to Google panacea, right? The political panaceas of the past, such as revolutions in Russia and China, have become the same old stuff under a different name. The search for freedom does not seem to have any road or destination. The young are inundated with a barrage of information and facts so overwhelming that the world has come to seem an utter bedlam. which has them spinning in a frenzy, looking for what man has always looked for from the beginning of time, a way of life that has some meaning or sense, a way of life that means a certain degree of order, when things have some relationship and can be pieced together into a system that at least provides some clues to what life is about. Men have always yearned for and sought direction by setting up religions, inventing political philosophies, creating scientific systems like Newton's, or formulating ideologies of various kinds. This is what is behind the common cliche, getting it all together. Despite the realization that values and factors are relative, fluid and changing, and that it will be possible to get it all together only relatively. These elements will shift and move together just like the changing pattern of a turning kaleidoscope. So we get more or less what he's saying right now. What's he saying? What's like summarize his first couple paragraphs for me? Somebody prove y'all was listening. What's his point? What's he saying? I don't know what's his point. Like, do you agree? Do you disagree? Is he like, does it seem relevant to anyone in the room? Does it seem irrelevant to anyone? Everyone's like, yeah, bullshit, that's not happening. What? Right. There are some people who are satisfied with the status quo, the way things are, right? And then there's, like I said, more people who are probably dissatisfied with the way things are, right? I don't think the way things are is necessarily just like the stuff you have, right? He's saying like there's a dissatisfaction with the material like world, or the material success being like the only barometer by which society is considered, right? Like some people, he says, at least he says a lot of the youth. I think I was once a part of the youth. I think y'all are part of the youth now, right? Don't want to use the material yardstick to measure like success in the world, maybe, right? Like maybe having a car and two chickens in every pot and like a nice house and whatever, right? I mean, not that these are like evil things, right? But like if you, I mean, so that's the question then. Let me just phrase it this way. If you all were to have that, if today, I mean, maybe y'all have that already. I don't know. Y'all have like your own house, you own, right? You have a car, you have a decent income, a decent paying job, right? A relationship, whether it's like a great relationship or just a tolerable relationship with somebody else, right? Like some friends. Is that by itself like enough to make you happy? Is that a good life? Is that what you define as a good life? Or is there something more that needs to be added to that to make life good? Or maybe all that stuff together doesn't make life good. There's something like outside from that that makes life actually like not worth living, but like meaningful and good.
It's different for everybody.
Sure.
Some people are like, as long as they're happy in their marriage, like they find happiness in just that one person. Some people with their job, as long as they're happy with their job, and everything's all right. It's just it's different for every person.
Right. So what's okay? That's a good point. Is there anything we can say is like a common factor? Like what's something that across everybody's lives, right? Maybe. I mean, because we are all different, right? We all have our own ideas. Things are relative to a point, right? We all have different derivations of happiness. Different things make us happy. Some people like chocolate ice cream. Some people like vanilla ice cream, right? And so, like, those things will not make the same people happy, right? But, like, is there something maybe overarching or undergirding everything that is common to, if not all, then most people? Okay. Partner, whatever. Yeah. What do those things give you? Like those relationships, right? Which I think are something we all probably either appreciate or long for, or both. Um, why are they important? What do they give you? Like, what do you get out of them? Other than like, okay, he buys me jewelry and I buy him guitars and we have good times and there's some, things that happen. Like, you're right. Other than that fun stuff, like what do we get from relationships with others, from interacting with our fellow human beings? But yeah, So yeah, being loved, being wanted, and that gives. I guess I'm trying to like the whole like what's in my pocket game from The Hobbit, right? I'm like I have an answer in my head I'm thinking of. I'm trying to get y'all to find a way to say it. But no, being loved and wanted, right, is part of it, right? What is that? What does being loved or wanted give your life? Meaning, yes, that's what's in my pocket was meaning, right? Meaning, direction, right? A sense of purpose, right? But the interesting thing, right, is like that sense of purpose, especially configured in relationships, right? With not like romantic relationships necessarily, just relationships with other people, right? Is it gives you a sense of direction and purpose and meaning in life that's not just from inside yourself, right? And so it's something that relies upon like the view of the evaluation of other people, right? And it gives you in a sense, even if it's just like your spouse, or your partner, or your boyfriend, or your best friend, you're working like to get to keep the respect of, to maintain the friendship of, right? To try to do good by, right? Like give yourself a sense of meaning that is outside yourself, that you're part of something in that sense, like bigger than yourself, right? Like even if it's just like the relationship between two people, right? It's still something bigger than just yourself, right? And so I think he's saying that a lot of young people, and he was writing this in like the 60s, right? So this is like young people who are now old people, right? But like we're dissatisfied with like thinking about things in the smaller meaning of what do I have? Like I have a nice car, I have a house, right? I have a crappy marriage or crappy relationship, or like people who like don't care about me or I don't care about other people, right? That there's somehow like this satisfying taste that's left in your mouth, and you have to like when that's your only metric by evaluating life is material things, right? Like there's something shallow and lacking in that. And he's saying, okay, well then like the young people following that, right, have had a fundamental rejection of that kind of notion of what meaning is, what value is. But like they've been largely lost is to find like a proper replacement for that. Right? Does that make sense? Right here, right? He's like looking for a way of like ordering life that gives some meaning and sense, right? Because if you have an ordering principle for your life, like in the second essay, like personal philosophy for life, right? And so these are the things you care about, and these are the things you're going to pursue, and here's how, right? Then more or less anything that comes down the pipeline at you, right? Anything that comes towards you, you have something that you can think about as far as what to do about that, right? You can relate it to something that you have as a constant and find a way to navigate your life based upon that point of orientation, right? But if not, then you're kind of adrift. And I think he's saying that a lot of people in this generation, which is the same generation Anne Van was writing about when she did that philosophy and Who Needs an Essay, right? Seemed kind of lost as to what those things were going to be for them, right? And it seems like, I mean, just like on reading y'all's essays, like y'all don't have that same kind of problem, right? And maybe it's a reaction to that. Maybe because like the way society works, it's a kind of like a pendulum in some ways, right? Like there's a generation that's more lost or has less direction, and then like they raise kids who are like, oh shit, like that's not what I want. I want to have some direction and have some. I'm not trying to like say your parents were lost or anything. Like mine kind of were, but like I'm not saying they're lost. I'm saying like that they're the priorities of things that parents value, right, tend to shift some degree in their children, regardless of if like even if like the values and the Christian values, Muslim values, whatever in the household, right, is the values, right? The things that are prioritized for achieving those values tends to shift a little bit because every generation sees things a little different, right? And so I think that's what he's saying is there's a lack of direction necessarily or discerning what life was about that the generation he was writing for. I think it carries on today in some ways, right? Kind of goes on. All right. In the past, the world, whether in its physical or intellectual terms, was much smaller, simpler, and more orderly. It inspired credibility. Today, everything is so complex as to be incomprehensible. What sense does it make for men to walk on the moon while other men are waiting in welfare lines, or in Vietnam killing and dying for a corrupt dictatorship in the name of freedom? These are the days when man has his hands on the sublime, while he is up to his hips in the muck of madness. The establishment in any ways is as suicidal as some of the far left, except they are infinitely more destructive than the far left could ever be. The outcome of the hopelessness and despair is morbidity. There's a feeling of death hanging over the nation. I mean, so let's orient ourselves a little bit, because we all hear, especially like if anybody watched the debate the other night, right? The far left, the far right, terms being thrown about, right? So Saul Alinsky is of the far left. He's a radical Marxist-ish, socialist kind of perspective, right? But and what the thing about him though, right, is whether or not you agree that Marxism, socialism is the way to go, right? Which Solzhenitsyn obviously didn't, right? like the words he has and the insights he's giving us to the mindset of the political climate in America, like are, I think, true, right? So whether or not you agree with his conclusions or his way to go about it, right? I think his diagnosis is applicable. Does that make sense? Like you have somebody who's sick, right? And you have a doctor who's like, okay, well, we need to treat with this drug. Like it's okay. So somebody, let's say a real example, like somebody has cancer, right? And somebody's like, okay, doctor says we need chemotherapy, right? And we need to put you on dialysis too for your kidneys, then, right? And like there's like a 45% chance you're gonna make it, right? But like this is the best course of treatment. You get a second opinion. They say, well, no, let's not do the chemo. Let's take this like homeopathic drugs or whatever, right? And try to like get rid of the cancer some other way through dietary changes, like mitigating stuff that's not actually killing your good cells. Like you know, like chemotherapy, right? The whole idea of chemotherapy is if we can kill off like 49% of your cells, right? So you got 51% left, but the 49% included the cancer cells, and you have 51% of your body more or less like grow back and like heal from that, right? That's like the basic stand. Antibiotics work the same way, right? Like antibiotics are like carpet bombing for freaking bacteria and for bacteria, right? Antivirals like carpet bombing for viruses. Like you kill all the good bacteria in your body. We have good bacteria in our stomachs, right? We have good bacteria in our intestines that help us like digest food and stuff. And the antibiotics just like nuke it all, right? And then the hope is that your body can reproduce the good bacteria and the good cells fast enough that it will outrun the bacteria that are being reproduced to. Right? That makes sense? It's kind of the Western approach to medicine in general. And he's saying this is kind of the same idea here, right? Is that we don't want to the same idea here that I'm trying to present, that he's trying to present, is that like you can agree with the diagnosis that you have cancer, right? And still be undecided as to whether or not the answer is chemotherapy, carpet bombing, right? Or like some homeopathic treatment and like diet change to try to do it a different way, right? I mean, if y'all don't believe in homeopathy or whatever, that's fine. I'm not saying that that's valid. I'm not saying chemotherapy is bad. I'm not saying one's better than the other. I'm just saying like the diagnosis of cancer, right, is pretty much the same, right? No matter what you do with that, right? So I think that though he's, I think, prescribing some treatments for the illness that I'm not personally in favor of, and I think there'll probably be different opinions in every room about which one people are in favor of, right? I think the important part here is the diagnosis and the awareness of that there are these treatments being prescribed as a metaphor. Does that make sense as a metaphor? I'm talking about? Yeah, okay, cool. All right. Today's generation faces all this and says, I don't want to spend my life the way my family and their friends have. I want to do something, to create, to be me, to do my own thing, to live. The older generation doesn't understand, and worse, doesn't want to. I don't want to be just a piece of data to be fed into a computer or a statistic in a public opinion poll or a voter carrying a credit card. To the young, the world seems insane and falling apart. I mean, is that true? The world seems insane and falling apart to some degree? Anybody here? Huh? On the other side is the older generation, whose members are no less confused. If they're not vocal or conscious, it may be because they can escape to a past when the world was simpler. They can still cling to the old values and the simple hope that everything will work out somehow, some way. But the younger generation will straighten out with the passing of time. Unable to come to grips with the world as it is, they retreat in any confrontation with the younger generation, with the infuriating cliche, when you get older, you'll understand. One wonders at their reaction if some youngster were to reply, when you get younger, which will be never, then you'll understand. So of course, you'll never understand. Those of the older generation who claim a desire to understand say, when I talk to my kids or their friends, I'll say to them, look, I believe what you have to tell me is important and I respect it. You call me a square and say that I'm not with it, or that I don't know where it's at, or I don't know where the scene is, and all the rest of the words you use. Well, I'm going to agree with you. So suppose you tell me, what do you want? What do you mean when you say, I want to do my own thing? What the hell is your thing? You say you want a better world? Like what? And don't tell me a world of peace and love and all the rest of that stuff, because people are people, and you'll find out when you get older. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say anything about when you get older. I really do respect what you have to say. Now, why don't you answer me? Do you know what you want? Do you know what you're talking about? Can we get together? Or why can't we get together? Is that a conversation like has maybe in some people's lives happened like pretty much like the same way as that? Yeah, maybe, yeah. Right? And that is what we call the generation gap. What the present generation wants is what all generations have always wanted, a meaning, a sense of what the world and life are, a chance to strive for some sort of order. If the young were now writing our Declaration of Independence, they would begin when in the course of inhuman events And their bill of particulars would range from Vietnam to our Black, Chicano, and Puerto Rican ghettos, to the migrant workers, to Appalachia, to the hate, the ignorance, disease, and starvation in the world. Such a bill of particulars would emphasize the absurdity of human affairs and the forlornness and emptiness, the fearful loneliness that comes from not knowing if there is any meaning to our lives. When they talk of values, they're asking for a reason. They are searching for an answer, or at least for a time, to man's greatest question: why am I here? The young react to the chaotic world in different ways. Some panic and run, rationalizing the system is going to collapse anyway of its own rot and corruption. And so they're copping out, going hippie or yippie, taking drugs, trying communes, or anything to escape. Others went for pointless shore loser confrontations, so they would fortify their rationalization and say, well, we tried, we did our part. And then they copped out too. Others, sick with guilt and not knowing where to turn or what to do, went berserk. They were the weatherman in their life. They took the grand cop-out, suicide. To these I have nothing to say or give but pity, and in some cases contempt, for such are those who leave their dead comrades and take off for Algeria or other points. Right? Saying here, I hopefully it's pretty clear, right? He's not nearly as confusing as Solzhenitsyn or Rand, right? He's not a philosopher; he's a political activist, right? He's saying like there are people out like this. So the weatherman, which is the weatherman, right? It doesn't mean like the guy in the evening news who's like telling you it'll be sunny and 78 degrees tomorrow, right? There's a group of people called the Weather Underground in the 60s and 70s who are a student like cross-campus national student organization who were like avowed terrorists and committed a bunch of bombings in the United States against a number of like government installations, some police stations, some like state congressional houses, right? So he's not like the guy who's like, it'll be 85 and sunny tomorrow, part chance of rain. This is like student-run terrorist group called the Weather Underground, or the Weathermen called themselves, right? So he's saying that they kind of like they didn't do a good job. That they undermine the cause, right? By going out and committing like suicide bombing places or like showing themselves in general, right? He's like, you can't. That's a cop out too. He says, right? But the three cop outs rather are the cop out of like, well, I can't fix anything, so I'm just gonna like step away and forget politics and forget like the world exists, right? The other cop out is like, I'm gonna like go to a demonstration, go to a rally, go to a march, right? And like march around for one day and be like, well, damn, that didn't change anything. I guess I'm out now. I did my part, right? And just think that you've done good, right? And the other ones are people who go like berserk or crazy, right? And go like blow the building or go like, try to assassinate, I don't know, like the president or whatever, right? Like that worked a couple times, right? And then they just like, I'm gonna like do some crazy crap and then fly to Algeria and like do a place. So Algeria has a non-extradition treaty with the United States, which means like if you like do some heinous shit and go to Algeria, the U.S. government can't like bring you back from there to prosecute. Right? That's what non-extradition means. But Edward Snowden, you all know Edward Snowden. You all hear Edward Snowden, the guy who released all like the files for the government, like the secret military files in Iraq about troop movements and stuff that endangered a bunch of U.S. troops overseas. He's like hiding out in like Venezuela right now at the embassy because it has a non-extradition treaty with the U.S. So also, if you do any heinous, crazy crap or get caught in something one day, some advice is Google non-extradition treaty countries with the United States and take the first plane ticket to one of those countries. I mean, then you won't have to go to jail. But I guess the better solution is don't do heinous shit. Cool? All right, cool. All right. Somebody want to read the next paragraph? Well, will somebody, even if they don't want to, will somebody read the next paragraph? It's a short paragraph. Fine, I'll do it. And somebody can read the long one then. What I have to say in this book is not the arrogance of unsolicited advice, it is the experience and counsel that so many young people have questioned me all about through all-night sessions on hundreds of campuses in America. It is for those young radicals who are committed to the fight, committed to life. Somebody? Okay, like knock it out.
Remember we were talking about revelation. You can miss the target by shooting too high as well as too low. First, there are no rules for revolution any more than there are rules for love or rules for happiness. But there are rules for the radicals who want to change their world. There are certain central concepts of action in human politics that operate regardless of the seat or the time. To know these is basic to a pragmatic attack on the system. These rules make the difference between being a realistic radical and being a rhetorical one. Uses a tired old word.
Oh, sorry to say bad words. Are you okay saying bad words? There are some swear words coming up here. How do you feel about saying swear words? I mean, you're an adult in this class. You have to say whatever you want, man. This is quoting.
Probably big or white, fascist, racist, or motherfucker, and has some stereotype himself that others react by saying, oh,
You understand what I'm saying?
No.
No, okay. I love how we're all like adults in here and it's like motherfucker. It's like, oh. I guess that thing's never because this is like we're in school, right? So you never expect it. This is an adult text. We're all grown-ups here, right? Not adult as in like NC-17. Adult as in like we're grown-ups, right? All right. So we're saying like, okay, if there are those radicals who are too radical, too like idealistic, right? And realize that okay, if you say some crazy shit, right, people are not gonna listen to you. If you go around and being like just calling everybody a bunch of names and stuff, right, and just like dropping bombs on them, not literally, but like rhetorically, right, with words, right, just hating on everybody. Like you could have good ideas and good intentions, right? But he's saying like you got to rein that back a little bit if you actually want to pursue political change, because if political change means hoping that like 51% of the people will vote for the ideas that you want to vote for, right? Then going around and calling people a bunch of names, no matter who they are, even if you actually like. If you don't like the police, if you hate the police, whatever, right? Like going around calling pigs and motherfuckers, right, is not a good way to change public opinion to the ideas you want to forward, right? So like he's saying he's like I understand exactly why people want to do that, right? I understand in the anger in the moment, everything, why people would say these things, but like he's like, you're literally like shooting the cause you believe in the foot if that's your primary mode of operation, because everybody's like, oh, you're one of those people who just says crazy shit. And then he says, and just promptly turn off. Like I'm turned off to whatever it is you have to say at that point, right? So yeah, that's what I said. The failure of many of our younger activists to understand the art of communication has been disastrous. Even the most elementary grasp of this fundamental idea that one communicates within the experience of his audience and fully gives respect to the other's values would have ruled out attacks on the American flag. The responsible organizer would have known that it is the establishment that has betrayed the flag, while the flag itself remains the glorious symbol of America's hopes and aspirations. And he would have conveyed this message to his audience. On another level of communication, humor is essential, for through humor, much is accepted that would have been rejected if presented seriously. This is a sad and lonely generation, yet laughs too little, and this too is tragic. What do you think? I mean, other than like at TikTok videos and shit, we laugh too little. You think so? What do you think? Really? Like, are we too serious? Maybe not like. I mean, maybe serious, right? Like, do we laugh too little? Is life not that fun? Are people not that humorous anymore? I try to be goofy in my classes because, like, okay, A, I'm goofy as hell, just in general. I want to be me, and B, like, it seems more genuine when somebody's like, well. The mating habits of the tsetse fly are demonstrated in slide 1, right? Kelly?
It goes back to that conversation that we had about like in school, nobody's gonna sit and joke in it's weird now.
Yeah, like go ahead. Like the impersonality. Right. Because who knows what somebody's gonna be pissed off about? Kind of, yeah. And like, yeah. Right. You think that couples? So that's a good question. I mean, a good point. You think it couples with the whole like digital communication thing? You think that so it seems. I mean, this is not exactly right. You have to correct me. The heightened sensitivity in personal communication, like in the real world, right, is somehow accelerated, or a catalyst for that is the interpersonal or the impersonal communication of online, like Twitter, Facebook, text messaging, Skype, Tinder, whatever, right? I don't know. Okay, so I got so yeah. Right. No, true, right? Yeah. Like that there's a lot of like false ideas even that are out there, or false. Okay, so there's a book that I was gonna try to get us to read, right? But like Solzhenitsyn was kind of like high level, right? We're not gonna read it though. I'm not gonna be like, oh, and I'm gonna sign it right now. No, it's called Pseudo Events. And basically it's the idea, and this guy wrote this book again, like this guy wrote this book in like 1968. Like the same year Solzhenitsyn spoke, I'm not gonna know. About how like the media in 68 was creating things called pseudo events. You have an event, right? Like, example, the plane flies into the Twin Towers, right? Like that's an event that happened, right? But then instead of like dealing with the news just reporting events, right? The news doesn't want to report events like nowadays, right? The news wants to report pseudo events. We're like, okay, we're gonna take something that happened like the plane flying in Twin Towers. We're gonna put up this, Department of Justice or the counterterrorism expert, right, on CNN or on Fox News, right? And he's gonna give his opinion, right? And when he gives his opinion, there's gonna be 4 or 5 people who disagree with it. So then the other news station, this public has the net, he comes on with the 4 or 5 people trashing what he says. Right, and so it's not the event itself. It's not the Twin Towers got hit by a plane, right? That starts being discussed. It's what this guy said about that, and how this is a scandal, and then how these 5 guys treated him that is a scandal, and then how all these people are wrong that is a scandal, right? So you have like an event that happens, right? But the news cycle isn't about the event. It's about all the dialogue and controversy that stood up from people giving their opinions about the event or their opinions about what somebody's opinion about the event was, right? And like that seems like we have this 24-hour news cycle, and I think like that's the vast majority of it. Isn't like talking about anything that actually happened. It's talking about the shit people said about what may or may not have actually happened. Is that fair? I think it sounds very like when I read that. Right. Yeah. And so the whole purpose isn't what actually happened. The whole purpose in the discussion, right, is people's arguing over what other people said. Right? People are outraged with what somebody said, not outraged about what happened, right? This also misses like the point because like you have instances of like obviously like unjustified police shootings, right? As an example, right? And like let's do George Floyd, for example, right? I don't think anybody maybe somebody, I don't know. I don't think anybody in this room, if you do, I apologize, would say that was like somehow justified. Like that was horrible. That was a tragedy, right? But like the whole thing about there's no getting around that. But it doesn't become about George Floyd anymore. It becomes about what people say about George Floyd, right? Or so then there's protests and there's violence because of what happened, right? And people are angry. And so we're not even focusing on George Floyd anymore. We're talking about political disparate opinions about what should be the proper response to what happened to George Floyd, right? And that becomes a news cycle, right? And so, like, it distances us from what happens as actual events, right? The things we should actually be, that we shouldn't be concerned about, like protests and like police putting down protests. We should be concerned about that too, absolutely, right? But the outrage that is generated from the event itself that did happen, right? It's so far distanced into people's opinions about what happened that, like, you can't even focus on trying to fix the actual problem that allowed the event to happen. Does that make sense? That's just my opinion, but like, I think that's not an invalid analysis of what happens in the media, right? Or because of the media. I don't mean that to be like, the media on all sides in all cases, including social media, right? Right. No, for sure. And it's about generating outrage and discourse, right? Or like when somebody exactly. Or when something is justified, right? They'll send a report out to like Greenbow, Alabama to find some like 80-year-old like ex-Klan member living in a hut and be like, hey, Cletus, what do you think about this? And he says some horrible shit because he's a horrible person, because nobody should ever be talking to this guy, let alone putting this guy on national TV. But people will do that. Why? Because it generates outrage. It's like, man, you should just punch this guy in the freaking face and be done with it, right? Like, you should not put a microphone in his face. In my humble opinion, right? So, like, there is outrage generated. Yeah, like, it's not about what actually happens. It's about what people, media corporations, as far as like Solzhenitsyn was saying, like the sales of papers, right, or the clicks on a link, right, because of what happened, it becomes the purpose of discourse, right? And I think that's what he's talking about here, right? That when that happens, right, like we can't. Even just look at what happened with stand-up comedy lately, right? Like Kevin Hart got disinvited for the freaking Emmys, like, well, never still an Emmys, right? Why? Because he said some crap 10 years ago, right, or whatever. Like, I'm not saying that's right, that's wrong, but like, he's a comic. The humor changes, right? Like, what's acceptable changes, and like to go back, it seems odd to me that would be like a thing, right? But you can say, okay, he shouldn't have said that shit, right? But like at the same time, like, you shouldn't disallow him from hosting the Emmys because he said that shit when that shit was fine. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not. But anyways, the point being too, right? He said, okay, so I think this is a relevant point we should talk about too, right? 'cause I don't think this happens like very much at all, right? Is the most elementary grasp of the fundamental idea that one communicates within the experience of his audience, right? So I'm talking to people I don't agree with, like the other side of the aisle politically, or it's people who don't agree with me in general, right? Like I need to give the full respect to their values. Like I need to not, and this is not like saying like I need to agree with them, right? Like I want to convince anyone of anything, right? I have to actually like listen and understand where they're coming from, right? I have to treat their values and their assumptions, as horrible as they may be, as legitimate to them at least, right? And only through like arguing against what they actually think. I can't just straw. You know what? You know what a straw man argument is? A straw man. You ever hear that? It's like you put a false image of what they believe, right? Like you're like, okay, so like, Dick Cheney's evil and a baby killer, right? Because of the Iraq War, right? Okay, and so like every time he talks about Dick Cheney, you say, "Oh, you're evil and a baby killer. You're evil and a baby killer." You won't hear anything else to say. Well, but maybe that's not the whole story, right? Maybe you should listen like what he has to say before you just say, "I won't listen to you because you're evil and a baby killer," right? Like that's what I'm saying is like you have to actually, because that's not going to convince anybody, either Dick Cheney himself or anybody who supports Dick Cheney, right? That what you have to say is valuable. It's just people are going to turn you off again, right? You're just like a yapping dog in the back of the ground, right? That's what I'm saying, like yeah, like you have to give full respect to other people's sides, which is, I mean, one reason why in this class, right, we're reading this book. And one reason, not only like there's this line that gives us perspective, right, but that like, even if you don't agree with like the ideology in this book, which I don't think everyone will, I hope everyone won't, right? It'd be dangerous if everybody did. That like, you'll give it the full respect that this is what people think and treat it seriously because people do think these things, right? And so if you don't think these things, that's just fine. But you need to find a way then if you are interested in communicating, convincing people to agree with you, right? You need to find a way to communicate with them where they're at, right? And in knowledge, in full knowledge and their recognition of where their values are, right? So you can then work within that framework. Is that? Yeah. Right.
Like you don't even have to talk about politics. Like I think that's the hurt. You have different opinions, but like it doesn't matter.
Right.
Where like we would be friends, but we like have different opinions. So it like our opinion shouldn't affect like our friendship. Or say for instance your dad has a different opinion, you should like just hit on your dad, or like he should get out, like you know.
Right. No, I agree. You know, there is, and because that's foreclosed on conversations, right? I mean, and this is becoming an increasingly unpopular belief, but I think I'm a person who thinks that like conversation and dialogue is the most important thing to change stuff, right? Like, and having those conversations. So if you're just like, okay, if you don't agree with me, then don't listen to me. So that means for me, then, right, the only people who I'm listening to are people who agree with me. So just because we're all human, right? I bet there's something in everybody's life we're just absolutely effing wrong about. At least one thing, right? Probably more things, right? Yeah. Exactly. How if everybody around me thinks exactly what I think, like exactly, right? Or if they don't, they won't say it out loud, right? Then how am I ever going to learn what I'm wrong about? Because I'm definitely wrong about something, right? So like I need to be challenged by other people who have, and I need to present spaces for those conversations to happen, right? I need to allow myself to like be wrong and to have conversations with people who, you know, just have different experiences. I can like evaluate those, right? And then say, okay, well, maybe I need to rethink myself about that. But if I'm like, okay, you have a different opinion than me, unfollow me. Don't listen. I don't want to talk to you ever again. Then all you're going to hear is like people who say exactly what you already say, which doesn't do a damn thing, right? Except makes you think all the effed up things you think, right, are actually true because they're around you saying them, even though they're effed up. Yeah. Right. Or not. Or even if you don't change their opinion, right? Yeah, just like they understand you better as a person. Like, and that's the thing too. There's a lot of equivocation on both political or all political sides, right? It's like if you don't agree with what I think, you're just a bad person. Like you're just a terrible person, right? And if you have a conversation, right, it's just like, okay, like I really don't agree with what you think. I really think the guy you're voting for is a terrible person, right? But like, I can kind of see what you're saying, right? And maybe I don't have to hate you too, right? Does that make sense? Like what you're saying, but more like the way things are right now, right? Like people like, you just think this thing, you're a bad person. Then like, I mean, there are things I think that are on the list of like, if you think this, then you probably are a bad person, right? But like, I don't think political questions are necessarily one of those things every time. Yeah. So yeah, good discussion on that. I think that's definitely true. I think social media furthers these divisions because instead of like, I mean, for example, if there's like a group of 4 people, like 4 of us go out to coffee, right? And there's like 2 people who are going to vote for Biden, 2 people who are going to vote for Trump. We're having a discussion, right? It's a lot harder to just like be like, F you, coffee in your face, and walking off, especially if you're friends already, right? They just don't click that unfriend button, right? It seems like that's an easier like way to, because I mean, if you're like in social, like, hey man, like if I said something that pissed you off or offended you, right, and you're my friend in public, we eat coffee, right? You stand up like, oh hey, like hey, like what? Like I don't want you to leave. Like I like you're my friend. Like let's work this out. Like I'm sorry. Let me hear what you know what I mean. There's more pressure in like a real life social situation to like resolve conflict. I think that like just being like I'm done or like throwing the phone against the wall or unfriending people, right, doesn't give space for it. Yeah, that's true. There's
It doesn't really hold any.
or like if their handle is like I don't know, like Luke Skywalker 659, right? Like who the hell is that, right? Which is another issue, right? You can just say, well, I think the heinous shit that gets said online is largely a byproduct of the assumed anonymity of the people who are saying it. To some degree, there are people who are like definitely like verified blue check mark people who are saying heinous shit, right? All right, but anyways, the real radical doing his thing is doing the social thing for and with people. In a world where everything is so interlaced that one feels helpless to know where or how to grab a hold and act, defeat sets in. For years, there have been people who have found society too overwhelming and have withdrawn, concentrating on doing their own thing. Generally, we have put them in mental hospitals and diagnosed them as schizophrenics. If the real radical finds that having long hair sets up psychological barriers to communication and organization, he cuts his hair. If I were organizing in an Orthodox Jewish community, I would not walk in there eating a ham sandwich unless I wanted to be rejected, so I could have an excuse to cop out. My thing, if I want to organize, is solid communication with the people in the community. Lacking communication, I am in reality silent. Throughout history, silence has been regarded as assent. In this case, assent to the system. That makes sense what he's saying there? Like, even so, it's like there's a fine line here, right, between like being true to yourself, right, and being true to the change you want to be in the world, right? So I forget my own thing. My thing is having like hair like this. I want my hair like kind of long, a little shaggy, whatever, right? But like somebody's like, man, you got long shaggy hair. I want to talk to you. You look crazy. Or like long like Jesus hair, right? Somebody's like, you look like a hippie, man. I don't want to talk to you, man. He's like, if you actually want to talk to that person and really like further your cause, clean it up, right? Because yourself, right, is not necessarily how you present yourself, right? Your actual self is these changes you want to be, the changes you want to seek, right? And if there's a barrier that you're imposing, right? Like if somebody's like, man, like you should wear deodorant because you stink. I'm like, man, I'm natural. I don't wear deodorant, man. I don't do that. I don't even like that, but I'm like, I don't do deodorant, man. He's like, put some pitch stick on and get out there and talk to people if you actually care about the world, right? Same thing is same with the Orthodox Jewish community, right? Like, okay, like I don't know, pork's not a thing that Jews, especially Orthodox Jews, eat. Same thing for traditional Muslims, right? So you walk in holding a ham sandwich or a Slim Jim to talk to a bunch of rabbis, a bunch of imams, right? It's not going to go very well. So he's like, put the ham sandwich down and go have a conversation with people, right? Like you're shooting yourself in the foot. And he's like, there are people who will specifically, intentionally shoot themselves in the foot to say, well, what? I walked in home a ham sandwich. And I tried to talk to them. They don't want to hear what I had to say, man. So I'm done now. F the system. I'm out. I'm going to go home and, drink a beer and like lie in my bed and cry or whatever it is, right? He's like, you can't set yourself up for failure and call it an actual attempt, right? There's this show called Metalocalypse. Have you ever seen that show? It's an animated show about this metal band. I recommend it highly. It's pretty funny. And at one point, anyways, the lead singer of the band said that he's going to like finish his high school degree, so he takes the GED test, right? He goes in and takes the GED, and he's like all sweating out, like taking it. Like a week later, they get the results back. Like the band manager opens it. He's like, you didn't pass. He's like, oh God. Oh. He's like, you got a zero questions were attempted. How did you not know this? Right? Which the joke is like, you didn't answer any of the damn questions. How did you think there was an outside chance you could somehow pass the GED? Right? It's kind of the same thing. Like you set yourself up for failure. You bring a ham sandwich into a room with a rabbi, conversation probably not going to go real well for you that day, right? All right. We'll continue on from there. Since the PDF's online, if next week, if people can, or yeah, for Monday, if you can read the rest of the introduction, which is like right here. So the first or the last like 10 pages of it, we'll discuss that on Monday without, I'll read parts of it in class, right? But we can like have more like a organic discussion. Like, well, what do you think about when he said this? And we can then talk about what he thought about when he said that. That sound good? Only 10 pages. That's up on the thing. If it was me, like, I'm weird, I would go home or go to the library or find somebody's mom who works at a grade school and has printer access and print the whole thing out. If you don't have pre-printer access, then bring on your tablet, your computer, whatever. That's fine too. Like, I'm just a person who likes the whole, pen and paper organic approach, right? So I'll go ahead and end the live stream now, and then we'll talk about the evidence sheets we're doing. If anybody has any questions on that public policy stuff, also it's something that we're not like quite like